Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, we'll cover that two-factor Dropbox flaw, how Team Telco forced fiber providers to enable surveillance, and the phishing attacks the FBI is issuing warnings about. Plus, we'll answer a big batch of your questions with our answers and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 118 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on July 11th, 2013. This episode is brought to you by GoDaddy.com. I'll tell you more about GoDaddy as the show goes on, and Ting.com. I'll tell you more about Ting as the show goes on. And of course, the live stream is powered by the amazing content distribution network, Scale Engine, over at ScaleEngine.com. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Hey, Alan. Welcome to episode 118. Almost didn't make it. Almost. The universe is conspiring against us. First of all, I thought my wife was going to labor this morning. That's how I woke up. That gives you an idea how my day started. And that's the range I'm in now. And then you kind of almost got struck by lightning.
Yeah, well, yeah. Yesterday, about half an hour from now, some lightning and some equipment damage, and I had to, spend 3 hours rewiring my house trying to get the internet to work again.
Yeah, in fact, you've got some parts on your desk there, don't you?
Yeah.
You had to sacrifice.
There's stuff everywhere. Yes.
Yeah, you had to do the PCI card.
We'll talk about that. We'll do a little war story down in the feedback section.
Fun. Okay. All right, well, we've got a big show today. Guess what? Big show. Big show. Although I don't know if we can be quite as big as last week, but we have a massive roundup segment this week. Tons of really interesting stuff in there. And
there was just so much stuff that we didn't cover last week because of how big the show was, and then the amount of stuff that we had to get to still. So, and
then we have a pretty rockin' news segment with some pretty big stuff. And one of our first stories is always one that I'm always I try to keep very aware of security developments around Dropbox, because I use Dropbox for a lot of my workflow production. I'm transitioning away from it, but I'm still very heavily invested in it. And you have a story in here that kind of implies there's some security issues with Dropbox. More, I guess.
Well, it's just a problem with their two-factor authentication system.
All right, what's going on?
So basically, because of the flaw, an attacker can circumvent two-factor authentication and disable it. So if the attacker already has your username and password, right, so it's presupposing a bit for this particular attack. But if I already know your username and password because of a keylogger or a phishing scam, or I just do, or whatever.
Or the person uses that same username password, because Dropbox uses your email address. So.
Yep. Yeah, the username is not really secret at all.
Right.
Dropbox doesn't verify email addresses when you sign up for a new account. So because of this, an attacker can sign up for a new account using your email address, but appending a dot to the end of it. And that's still a valid email address because of the way domain names work. So domain names are a hierarchy, kind of like directories on a computer, except for it's aligned to the right side instead of the left. So the root of the domain name system is actually the dot at the end that we don't normally print.
Right.
And then you have com, net, org, ca, us, tv, all the top-level domains. And then you have like jupiterbroadcasting.com, and there's actually another dot there you don't see right at there.
Right.
And then you have www.jupiterbroadcasting.com, right? So on. So technically that dot at the end is actually there. We just don't print it to save typing. And this becomes important if you're administering a DNS server and so on and so on. But anyway, because of that, your email address is valid with a period at the end of it, right? Because it goes after the .com or whatever. So someone can sign up for Dropbox using your email address and adding that dot at the end, and Dropbox will see that as unique and won't say, sorry, there's already an account on that email address.
Aha.
The thing is, if you log into this new account you've just signed up as, Chris at jupiterbroadcasting.com when you enable two-factor authentication, you're given an emergency override code to disable two-factor in case you lose your cell phone or something.
Okay, sure.
Right? But if you log into now if I log out and log into your account without the dot, and then when it prompted for the two-factor authentication, I say I lost my phone and enter that emergency override code, which for some reason is the same for both these accounts, then I disable two-factor auth and I'm into your account.
So it's something they kind of tried to do probably to prevent a tech support nightmare, especially at scale.
Well, right. The interesting thing is why having the dot at the end makes the email address unique so that it's two separate accounts, but somehow they have the same override code. So whatever they're using to make the override code, which I just guess is something like a hash of some part of the account data, means that the code can be the same for two different accounts.
That's unbelievable, actually.
Well, so, it probably means it's not based on the email address, or it's only based on the first part of the email address.
That's what I was going to suggest, yeah.
Well, or it could be based on the password. If they didn't say in the test if they use the same password for the fake account. They probably did. And so if it's based on the password, then that could be why as well.
I'm looking at the chat room's reaction, and they are a little disappointed in Dropbox. I guess I haven't turned on two-factor authentication with Dropbox yet, but this is sort of the exact kind of thing that you expect. So I guess what I get back to is the core issue is a lot of these two-factor systems have these sort of backdoors to solve problems that two-factor systems introduce. Like I look back at the flaw that you covered that Google Authenticator had, where they generated these one-time passwords for applications specifically, but those passwords worked for anything.
Where you couldn't have the pop-up for OTP happening in the middle of it, yeah.
Right. And that was sort of Google's attempt to address a legacy issue that two-factor authentication breaks. And now here you have Dropbox, where the core, I think the core issue here is you can actually just generate this code and turn it off, right? That seems to be where the core problem is, which they created to prevent a support nightmare. And so you see where two-factor authentication continues to fail just based on implementation.
Right. So maybe they could do something like an email verification. So when you try to disable two-factor authentication, it actually sends an email and you have to confirm it.
Well, why not verify the account email at creation like 95% of other services
Exactly, because otherwise you're just sending spam to people.
Yeah. And then B, why would you not do an email when two-factor has been disabled to just say, hey, we've disabled this setting in your account. We thought you should know. A lot of other places
notifying is helpful, but it doesn't actually stop somebody from getting access to all your files.
Yeah, and what's funny is I just read an article yesterday that said that Dropbox's long-term goal as a business is to be everything. They want to store everything you have as an online
your hard drive.
Yeah, that was the exact quote. They want to replace your hard drive. Well, guess what, guys? You got a little work to do. Because I'm moving away, and I have, like, right now, if I look at my Dropbox account,
the internet just can't handle that kind of, like, the latency involved with using the internet for a drive. I've looked at using iSCSI to have, the Windows drive in my main Windows machine to actually exist on top of ZFS.
That'd be cool.
Right? Just to gain the ZFS awesomeness on my regular Windows drive. But the latency and stuff over the network would mean it would be slower than having a real hard drive.
It'd have to work.
Why would I want it?
It would have to work with local caching, which means they wouldn't be replacing the drive. But I just looked. I have 192 gigabytes in my Dropbox. So that probably classifies me as a moderately heavy Dropbox user. And I'm telling you, I'm counting the days until I can fully replace the system because it's about every 6 months some story comes out about Dropbox that just makes you go, oh, guys, no.
It's like the second and third week of TechSNAP, and it's kind of shaped TechSNAP into what it is today.
Yeah. It was maybe our first episode we had drop. Was it like that early on?
Maybe it was first or second episode was Dropbox, and then Sony, and then Dropbox again, and that kind of just shaped how the show turned out.
The chat room suggesting
it's not really what the show was originally going to be.
Right. The chat room is suggesting that maybe Dropbox could use that NSA data center in Utah to cache and accelerate file retrieval for you, Alan. Maybe that's how they could make
Sure. But that doesn't solve the security problem.
So is there a fix in place? Is Dropbox shutting down this function right now, or is it just kind of business? I don't
know. It doesn't say. There's no update. I imagine they will fix it.
Yeah, I mean, it says here at the end, it says QSer has worked with the Dropbox security team to patch the issue. But that's all it says. That's all it says.
Well, then it's sorted. Well, I'm guessing they changed what they used to generate the emergency code so that it's not, or also just remove trailing dots from email addresses to
Yeah.
Not deduplicate, but what's the word? The normalize. To normalize the email addresses so you don't end up with duplicates like that.
Yeah, it was actually being used in the wild.
Right.
So yeah, boy. Between backdoor key access and that kind of stuff, it really kind of makes you think. Of course, I'll keep on trucking. It's good. I like the functionality Dropbox provides. I just don't like the security aspect of it. But as I kind of
played with OwnCloud a little bit, but I got sidetracked.
I was thinking, OwnCloud just introduced another version, a minor update, and I haven't looked into it at all. I don't know if the claims are true or not, but one of the features it claims now is fully anonymous upload. I don't know. You got IP logs, right? You got all this. I don't know how that's possible. But it says,
well, if you're hosting your own OwnCloud, then
yeah, I have the log. It's still not anonymous though, because I've got your IP.
Right. Well, because it uses an HTTP server, so if you don't log on your HTTP server, there's no logs.
Right. That's how you would do it. Yeah. So that came out in the latest OwnCloud. And OwnCloud also now has a sync client that you can install on your desktop. It's not as sophisticated or as fluid as Dropbox.
That's the one I've looked at. It seemed to work, but yeah, they have one for Mac as well and one for Linux, but nothing for phones yet.
And but they're working on it. And
I think I need my phones to need my files anyway.
Well, I really want something kind of powered by a Raspberry Pi. Really would be ideal, because I just need something that I could put in the corner, low power, that just is sort of the central point of syncing all of my files. And then I think I'd really be set. It doesn't need to be some massive, it doesn't have to be my FreeNAS server, it doesn't have to be some big box, it just needs to be something that's copying files.
Yeah, but FreeNAS makes more sense because where the storage would be, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, I'd have to do like some sort of NFS mount or something. Yeah, I don't know how that would work on the Raspberry Pi. All right, well, should we take a break here and thank our first sponsor?
Sure.
All right, that is Ting.com. Go over to TechSNAP.Ting.com and you'll save $25 off your first device, or if you've got your own Sprint device, you get $25 off your first month of service. Now, what is Ting? Ting is mobile that makes sense. They're a no BS mobile service provider. They are an MVNO of Sprint, so if you've got good Sprint coverage in your area, you're going to get great Ting service. I've been using Ting since the beginning of the year, contract free, and I love it. Right now I've got in fact, I brought it out in studio with me. I loves it. I got my HTC One right here. Alan, I know you've your Android phone's kind of getting a little long in the tooth. Now, I know you're not a big upgrader. I know.
It is, but yeah, I just use it to make phone calls and the odd text message.
I know, but these new phones are so nice. And this is, for me, as somebody who has multiple devices, I am a huge fan of Ting, because Ting it's a flat rate of $6 a month. You put the device on a Ting plan, you're paying $6, and then after that, you only pay for what you use. They just have rates, and as you use it, you'll enter a different bucket. This is a really awesome approach, and it allows me to have multiple devices that have Ting service and not end up paying a ton of money. So they break your rates out by minutes, text messages, and megabytes, and then they bill you at the end of the month for whichever bucket you just fall into. They've got a little video up on their website that explains it if you want a little more information. So go to TechSNAP.Ting.com and watch that video. I'll tell you, when you combine a system like this, where you only pay for what you use, with their really, really slick dashboard, that is immediately, in fact, you know what, I'll log into the dashboard. I'll show you my dashboard, because it is so nice.
Right.
And
well, I really wish they had Ting here in Canada, even though Ting is Canadian. Because, yeah, like my business partner has a BlackBerry, an iPhone, and an Android for testing our video streaming on different mobile devices.
Oh, yeah.
And we're paying ridiculous amounts of money for all those.
This would be perfect for you.
Internet connections.
Yep.
And, we need some amount of bandwidth because we're going to do video streaming on them.
And you want to try it on mobile. You want not just Wi-Fi.
Exactly.
Yep.
So if we could get all those at $6 a piece and then just a bucket of data would be great.
So check this out. Here's my Ting dashboard. This is my actual account. I have multiple devices on this account. At my current amount of usage, I'm going to pay $21. $21. And you see they have these big meter bars.
I pay more than that just for data.
I know. They have these big meter bars, so I can see exactly where I'm at. I know what rate I'm going to fall into.
Of data, not unlimited data, like 500 megabytes of data.
You use 500? Yeah. Well, I currently see what's great is
500 megabytes.
See, I'm going to pay $3 for my data so far this month. That's what I'm going to end up paying, $3 for my data. You see what I'm talking about? This is why I love Ting. Go to TechSNAP.Ting.com and check them out. They're changing things up. They're giving you, as the mobile user, more power over your plan. And as our mobile devices become more commonplace computing platforms, having this kind of control, having this kind of oversight of your account, and having this and getting the prices down to where they're at too, that's a big part of it. This is going to be really essential as these devices become our main devices, or more and more so at least. Go to techsnap.ting.com, and thanks to Ting.
The important thing is that they're bringing the cloud mechanism of paying only for what you're using instead of having this giant fee that you have to pay just in case you might use it.
Right, that's exactly it. They're totally paying for stuff, paying for this big old batch of minutes that just sort of sit there and never get touched.
Yeah,
that's a scam.
Yes.
So I just I'm loving they're shaking this whole thing up, and I know with our audience too, like $6 and I'm set. I know I've got data, I've got mobile, and as LTE got lit up in my area, boom, it just worked. It just all of a sudden some extra LTE tiered plan I have to get, and I have built-in hotspot and tethering with my service. No extra charge. I just go into the Android menu, I turn on hotspot, and it's a Wi-Fi access point. Pow. And I just pay for what I use. No bigs.
Yep.
Love it. TechSNAP.ting.com, and thanks to Ting for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. All right, Alan. Now this next story.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of funny to I'm a skeptical guy all the time, but the FBI has done an actually pretty good job of sort of noticing trends at times and putting out warnings. Is this what's happening here, or is this something else altogether?
You skipped in story entirely.
Oh, did I? Oh, all right. I was ready to go after the FBI. What story did I skip?
The whole page before it.
Oh, Team Telecom.
The one that's not so nice about the FBI.
Yeah, Team Telecom. This is actually a really big deal. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in about 2000, basically after 9/11, the U.S. government established Team Telecom, which is basically a giant array of lawyers they use to badger internet service providers, or more specifically, transit providers, which are the backbones of the internet. And basically forcing especially foreign-owned fiber providers to allow the U.S. government access.
Yeah, and specifically there was, what was it, Globalcom? Globalcom was being bought out or was buying out some of the infrastructure, and they actually mandated that there's they have a little department that was dedicated to responding to the U.S. government's requests, right?
Yeah. So basically in 2003, the Network Security Agreement was signed between the U.S. government and Global Crossing, which was a major internet backbone. They're one of the largest transit providers on the internet, and they connect about 200 major cities in 27 different countries on 4 continents.
Good place to tap.
Quote, in months of private talks, the team of lawyers from the FBI, the Departments of Defense, Justice, and Homeland Security demanded that the company maintain what amounts to an internal corporate cell of American citizens with government clearance. So basically, when a foreign fiber company wants to connect into the States, they have to get authorization from the FCC, right? A cable license. It's a fairly simple process. But the FCC would hold up approval of those cable licenses until those ISPs had signed one of these agreements with the U.S. government. So the agreement also requires the transit providers maintain a network operations center, or NOC, specifically on U.S. soil, right? Because some of these companies are actually foreign, right? So they have a NOC where they monitor their global network. It just doesn't happen to be in the U.S. But these guys mandated that there be a network operations center in the U.S., and this NOC must be staffed with U.S. citizens who've been pre-screened and cleared by the government and operate under gag orders.
Right. And available to respond within a government request within 30 minutes.
Yes. And also that they can't even tell the executives and directors of the company about what they're doing. So Global Crossing basically had to allow a team of U.S. government, not spies, but agents basically, to work for them and answer requests on behalf of the U.S. government without even telling the company about it.
Right. I mean, think about this. Think about the negotiation for this. So we're gonna put a group of people in your business, and they're gonna be completely independent. They're not gonna answer to you. They're not gonna tell you what they're doing, and they're just gonna take orders from us.
Yeah. And if you don't, then you can't connect your fiber into the States where the rest of the internet is.
And yeah, so of course, then they would have no reason to buy that, to make that fiber purchase, and the deal would be dropped. And yeah, I mean, it was like, do it or you don't have a business. Well,
and there's more interesting. So originally, Global Crossing started in the 90s, and it was a U.S. company. But in 2002, after the dot-com bomb and everything, they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. At that time, a deal was set up with a partnership between Singapore Technologies Telemedia and the Hong Kong-based Hutchison Whampoa Group, which basically another so these two telecoms were going to get together and buy Global Crossing. But the U.S. government didn't really like that idea. So they pressured the Hong Kong side of the partnership, and the Hong Kong side eventually withdrew their part of the plan.
Okay.
And because the U.S. government was worried that the Chinese government would gain access to the surveillance requests. The U.S. government didn't want the Chinese government knowing who the Americans were spying on.
Right.
Specifically, like we've talked about in previous cases, the U.S. government didn't want the Chinese government to be able to tell whether the Chinese government was, or the U.S. government was on to the Chinese agents. Right? Like when we talked about, remember Google's list of accounts being monitored by the U.S. got compromised? Mm-hmm. And their big fear here was that now the Chinese know which of their agents in the States has actually been uncovered by the U.S. government. Right? So that we can't just monitor these people and catch them and find out who else they're dealing with.
Right, because they're watching some Chinese. They don't want them to know.
Yeah. So just because you know someone's a spy, you don't go arrest them right away. You see who else they meet with.
Right? That's where they're more valuable.
Watch a movie, people. Come on.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the U.S. government pressured the Hong Kong company not to basically were saying, no, we won't let the deal go through if you're part of it. So eventually the Singapore side got together enough money and bought the majority stake of Global Crossing by themselves. However, under their agreement with the U.S. government, more than half of the board of directors of the new Global Crossing would consist of American citizens with security clearances. And some very specific roles, the U.S. government had veto power on them appointing people to those roles.
Wow. This is really... We are having a massive picture, a puzzle being assembled in front of us. We're seeing now how they got the access to the infrastructure to set up programs like Prism.
Right, and this is 10 years ago.
This Team Telecom was like the Avengers team that assembled after 9/11 and got together to go out and trample some rights. And it sounds like they were like mobsters in some cases. In fact, there are certain CEOs that are not necessarily great individuals themselves, but there are certain CEOs of telco companies that refused access to their infrastructure like this, and they are in jail right now. Yeah. I think I don't like the picture this puzzle is forming, Alan.
Yeah.
And when you have access at this level, you kind of have access. They essentially have access to everything that comes and goes out of the United States. They really do.
Right. Well, that was their goal. That's why you need to use SSL for everything.
And then they'll just record it for sure.
Yeah, they'll record it, but they won't be able to read it, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Anyway, so this agreement was used as a template for other foreign-owned telcos and applied as foreign investors bought, stake in different existing telcos. So in 2011, Global Crossing was sold to a U.S. telco, Level 3, which is one of the even bigger transit providers.
Right.
However, that Singapore Telemedia kept a minority stake, and this resulted in that whole thing having to be renegotiated still, and the Team Telecom came in again and adjusted some things.
They were really Team Telecom it's an interesting little thing that I don't know, maybe people knew about this. A lot of these revelations, certain aspects about them, pre-Edward Snowden, we already knew from either previous NSA whistleblowers or stories that we've covered here on this show. But I don't know about some of these details, like this Team Telecom. I was reading about them a little more last night, and it kind of sounds like they were involved in getting sort of like identifying what online communications platforms need to be reclassified as telco applications like Skype, and then they would push the government and those companies into classifying those programs as telecom programs, and then they would all of a sudden be applicable to all of these monitoring laws. So they just automatically fell into this entire umbrella of surveillance rights that they would get once they reclassified the software. And that was like back in 2010 that they were pushing for Skype and other programs. So this has been going on for a while. The infrastructure has been laid in and it's locked in. I don't think it's reversible, even.
Not particularly, no.
That's extremely disappointing, Alan.
But, this didn't really start, per se, in 2003, right? Tapping undersea telecom cables has been a key component of U.S. Intelligence collection since World War II.
Right.
Right. The U.S. Navy had a number of submarines specifically outfitted for going into the seas and lakes and so on near Russia and tapping into their underwater copper cables to listen to their phone calls.
Yeah. The NSA has a fleet of submarines. In fact, they just recently retired one of them. And they're getting a new one. And it operated. The one they just retired operated for 36 years.
Yeah, and basically go to undersea cables and latch onto them and listen in. If you're interested in that kind of thing, there's a book I read. It's Stalking the Red Bear.
Oh.
And it's submarine commander stories about the secret stuff he did at the end of World War II up until midway through the Cold War.
Stalking the Red Bear? Are you sure that's what it's called?
Yep.
I'll tell you which one I just got, which talks a little bit about the NSA submarine fleet, is Shadow Factory. It was written in 2008, but it is extremely relevant today. It gives you tons and tons of background. I've recommended it on Filter, but Shadow Factory. So use our Amazon affiliate link at the bottom of the Jupiter Broadcasting website, and then go buy Stalking the Bear and Shadow Factory if you guys are curious.
Yes. Stalking the Red Bear, the true story of U.S. Cold War submarines' covert operations against the Soviet Union.
I wonder if I could pick up that NSA submarine. Pick it up used, make it like a podcasting submarine where I. All right, I'll put a link to here. You know what, Alan? I'm going to link Stalking the Red Bear right now in the show notes because I'm going to get that. So. Did
you get the?
Yeah, I put it. You saw you put in the chat room. So I will add that to...
Because I have the one with the affiliate code.
I see that. You're so good on. Pro.
Hopping Mad Patty forgot the affiliate code.
Oh, Hopping needs to go get the extension. Hopping, if you go to jupiterbroadcasting.com and scroll down to the bottom of our website, there'll be a link down there for your browser, either Firefox or Chrome, and then it'll just automatically tag those Amazon links for Jupiter Broadcasting. It's okay, Hopping. All right, Alan. Well, any other notes on this story?
Oh, there's a nice infographic of the...
of how they do it? Or of the,
no, this is just how the internet connections are laid out.
Yeah, I've shown that.
And, what percent of the world's traffic goes through the U.S., even though the two endpoints aren't the U.S., and so on.
Well, yeah. It looks like quite a bit. It doesn't look like it goes below 86%. Right? Am I reading this right?
It depends on the...
86% of all international internet bandwidth is connected to U.S. cities.
Right, well, partly that's because that's where the connection is going.
Yeah.
But, yes.
Yeah. How much data flows so they're saying that some of these lines are 20.6 terabytes per second?
Well, no, that's how much
is coming through them
that country has or whatever.
Okay. Nice.
Europe has the most at almost 70 terabits a second, but most of that's just connecting Europe to Europe.
Yeah. Latin America has 6.6, Asia 10.2, America 20.6. How about that? How about they share some of that terabit with me? I'd like a terabit connection. Yeah, we'll have that link in the show notes.
I can do 50 gigabits, but that's about it.
I'll take 50 gigabits. I'll take 50 gigabits.
Yeah, well, you'd have to be in 30 places at once to use the 50 gigabits.
Yeah.
I don't have it all at one place.
All right, so now should we talk about the FBI?
Yes.
All right, they're warning us about increased sphere phishing. Oh, wow, easy for me to say.
Phishing.
Yeah.
I guess you could do sphere.
Yeah, I was
trying to catch spheres with your.
It's like
phishing.
A ball, and there's a watch out. They're throwing it at you. It's a sphere. No, I don't know.
So, as we've seen, many large companies have been compromised lately because of phishing. Right? They get an initial beachhead into the network by a phishing email to secretary or something, and then jump from there to get into the rest of the network. We talked about one of those. It was secretary, and then they keylogged on her machine and did a man-in-the-browser attack and stole $100,000 from the company's bank account.
Well, wasn't there a rumor that's how Stuxnet got started? Was by an object embedded in a spreadsheet? Does that sound legit? Can't remember.
Not Stuxnet, because that was the one that went after the
Iranian centrifuges.
Right. It was one of the related ones.
Okay.
But also, remember when we talked about The Onion and the Financial Times?
Yeah.
Both of those were phishings, and they got in, and then they got eventually compromised enough to get into the Google Docs and stuff. And, they explained all those in detail, but we saw that how it started with phishing attacks and how some of them weren't even very sophisticated phishing attacks.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
And a lot of people in the defense and aerospace industries have been targeted by really highly sophisticated spear phishing attacks. We talked about one where, people that worked in aerospace got this email all professionally done up, inviting them to a conference that didn't actually exist. But attached was a PDF flyer. Very nicely done, looked legit, except for it also exploited, I think it was Adobe Flash inside Acrobat to install a virus on your computer and go from there. Right? So phishing emails aren't always written in broken English and are obviously phishing emails. Right? According to research by the AV vendor Trend Micro, 91% of all targeted attacks against companies, malware attacks where they're going after somebody or something specific rather than just blanketing the internet with it, 91% of them involve spear phishing in some way, usually at the beginning.
Because if you're going after a specific target, you might know, well, they're interested in this, or they correspond with this person, or that.
Or this is the name of the person I can get in contact with, or if I'm going to send something, instead of saying from support department, it can say from, company name, internal IT security, or something like that, saying about, you need to go here and change your password. And then the link could take you to a site that looks like your corporate website, like it's got the same color scheme and so on, so the user falls for it. So there's a training company called Phish that actually offers training against this, but a different type. Right? Traditionally, the training against phishing has been, teaching people a couple of basic things and telling them don't open attachments or whatever. But what PhishMe does is actually send you phishing emails. And when you fall for them, you get, instead of getting infected, you get training material explaining what you did wrong.
That is hilariously awesome.
So they said, based on the statistics they've collected with their clients, at the beginning, about 60% of their employees fall for the phishing emails. But as the training goes on, and they send the users different type of phishing emails, like ones that just have links, one that have embedded attachments, and all the different types, eventually the training gets that number down into the single digits, like less than 10%. And then those last 10% people get, special training. And then usually about 75% of those people eventually get remediated, leaving a much smaller chance of your company getting phished.
Well, they have a nice bar graph that shows that people who use PhishMe have less phishing attacks after their training.
Yeah, but so they even go as far as to have some of the phishing links take you to a site that asks you to enter your username and password and stuff. And, as the administrator, when you're using the PhishMe software, you set it up and you can make it look like your corporate website or whatever. So you can make it look like the real login page.
Oh, cool.
Right? So remember with the Onion one, they sent them through a Google authentication page. Right? And so this one, you would send it through, your company's authentication page, and then you would ask the users to enter sensitive information that they shouldn't give out. Right? And when they do, you send them to the training pages. Whether those are generic ones provided by PhishMe, or you can redirect to your own material if you have some. But basically, the general training that people seem to get doesn't seem to work, right? Like every company says they train their employees not to fall for phishing emails, but they still fall for phishing emails all the time. So this type of training where it can be ongoing too, right? It's not, once a year we give you the afternoon off to go to a class where we teach you not to fall for phishing emails. This is, all the time we're sending you these phishing emails,
when you're not expecting
your real email, and admonishing you every time you fall for it.
I like the idea that it's something people aren't looking for, they're not expecting it.
Exactly.
And because you can catch somebody when they're having a bad day and they're not really thinking, they haven't drinking their coffee yet. Kind of really reinforce it. Yeah,
and so once they get stung a couple of times by ones that don't actually do any damage, it sinks in better.
Yeah.
And you don't have to use the PhishMe system to do this. Any IT administrator can make up their own phishing emails and send them out to their everybody on the mail server or whatever.
I guess so, huh?
And then you can log who fell for it and who didn't,
and then shame them.
Yes. Name and shame. Maybe not the first time. The first time they fall for it and they get this thing and be like, hey, you fell for a phishing
No,
email.
I want you to post it on your company internet, have a wall of shame.
No, not the very, very first time. But yes, after that. It's like, you fell for a phishing email. Be more careful. Next time you're going on the wall of shame.
The wall of shame. Yes. Well, I like it. I like that there's a service out there. It makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah. And anyway, I thought that was interesting. So, the FBI is a little behind the times telling big companies to worry about this, but the Phish Me thing is a good idea, actually.
Yeah.
If you're your employees are going to get phishing emails, you'd rather the first one that they fell for was from you and that they learned that way, rather than the first one they fell for was from the bad guy and they learned when $100,000 goes missing from the company bank account.
So I guess the FBI is only what? How many years old is email? What year was email invented? 1971, technically. So they're only 4 years late.
The spear phishing and specifically going after like defense contractors and stuff has only been around.
Yeah.
It's been getting worse and bigger lately.
Yeah. All right. Well, I know we got one more news story to get to.
Yes.
But I thought it'd be a good spot. Well, or do you think we should do that last news story first?
No.
Okay. All right. We'll stop and thank GoDaddy, our second sponsor this week. GoDaddy.com. GoDaddy.com. We still got that Tech 249 code, folks. When you're over at GoDaddy and you're checking out, hit that promo code little link right there. Put in Tech 249, and you'll get your .com for $2.49. If you have several .coms, you'll get each one for $9 after that $2.49. But something I think will be up your guys' alley is the free private registration with a new .com. Use the code FREE5. FREE5 when you check out over at GoDaddy for your .com, and you'll get free private registration. And that's a great idea, especially when you're doing something for your house, something for a blog, anything like that. That's sort of a private, personal thing. Get the free private registration with the code FREE5 when you check out. Now, of course, don't forget though. Don't forget. For another limited time, maybe you want to do something else entirely. A little web hosting. Want to get a VPS? Maybe you want to throw some OwnCloud on there? I know what you're thinking. I know how you roll. Use the code GO32OFF3 when you check out. GO32OFF3 will get you 32% off the entire order. So here's what I would do. If it was me, if I'm walking up to a place and I'm sitting down at the GoDaddy shopping cart, I'd be putting in a .com in there. I'd be putting in some hosting in there. I'd be putting in some search engine mojo in there. I'd be putting in all kinds of stuff, you guys, because you're getting 32% off the entire order when you use the code GO32OFF3. It's some kind of a legal deal. It's so good. And I think it's a special deal that's a certain race car driver hooked up for Alan and I.
There you go.
There you go. Go32OFF2, right? Is that what it was? Go32OFF3.
I don't know. It's your code.
No, it's new. It's Go30. They just changed it. It's Go32OFF3. Go32OFF3 to get 32%. Tech 249 to get your .com for $2.49. And FREE5 for free private registration with the .com.
Ooh.
And that's a lot of really great deals that GoDaddy's getting us. So thanks to GoDaddy. I know, right? Thanks to GoDaddy for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. And thanks to you guys out there who sponsor our sponsors. Seriously, that's why they keep coming back, is because you guys are taking care of us. So thank you to everyone out there who's using our codes when they check out over at GoDaddy.com. All right, now what is that last story of the week? Well, not really.
So the MIT Media Lab has rolled out a tool called Immersion, and it actually allows you to visualize your email metadata.
Oh gosh,
we know that the government is collecting this, and we talked about that story last week where it gave you a little visualization of the phone metadata of this one politician or whatever.
Well,
so this does it with email.
This reminds me too of, remember, was it last week, the week before? You showed us a tool that you could link to your Gmail account, and then we'll go in there and analyze it and tell you how valuable it was.
Right, by finding all your passwords and stuff in it. So this one basically does the same thing. It logs into your Gmail with OAuth, but basically it goes through all of your email headers, looks at the to, from, CC, and timestamp on each email, and builds a social graph. So you get this visualization of who you talk to the most and how the different people you talk to are related to each other.
Ooh, I should throw this in my Jupiter Broadcasting account where I get emails from people all over the world.
Yeah.
Oh, this is really cool, Alan. Oh my gosh, this is so cool.
And then after you view the report, you can decide whether or not you want to allow them to save it for their use. You can say no, and they won't. And if you say yes, you can come back at any time and delete it. And you can also save a snapshot of the social graph, and they'll keep that for 30 days for you to see. But if you keep it on, it keeps auto-updating as well.
This is
So it's
really
interesting.
cool. Have you played with it?
Used to have, no. I used to have something that was very similar but based on IRC. And it would take the logs from the chat room and build a social graph like this by looking at who talked to who based on, when you prefix what you're saying with someone's name or just when people are talking close to each other, like in the time-wise.
I really like how it shows how people link up. Like I can see my family members who talk to each other a lot and then CC everybody. Look, they got like good groups on here. This is so cool. I'm totally throwing this in my Jupiter Broadcasting account.
Yeah.
That's going to be fascinating.
But, it allows you to quite quickly kind of see this is the type of information that metadata provides. And I don't have the link handy, but
yeah, you're right. This really
there was one that was going to be in the show and then got bumped because it wasn't as interesting. But somebody wrote an essay about how using metadata, they would have arrested Paul Revere as a terrorist before the American Revolution. Oh,
yeah. People have been making a lot of references to pre-crime and stuff like that, which you can get from this, where you can see somebody's. Yeah. I love.
But basically, it just shows how the network analysis works.
I love data.
Make the connection.
I'm such a geek for data, actually. So I love turning all this stuff on and analyzing my different account things. I used to have a back when I was an exchange user for the company I worked for. We had Outlook and we had Zombie Z. It was inbox backwards, and it would sit there and tell me all of the people I talked to the most, what times they email me, and I would use that. I would get a bar graph of when a person was the most active in their email, and then I could use that for my boss to email my boss, and I would almost always get a response if I emailed them during the sweet spot. That kind of data is very useful. I want the data. I don't want other people to have the data. That's all I'm saying. All right, so people can find a link to this in the show notes if you want to check it out. It was called Immersion. You can go to immersion.media.mit.edu or just click the link that Alan has in the show notes. I'll throw it in the chat room right now if you guys want to play with it, because we're about to go on break. You guys can play with it during the break. All right, Alan, any other thoughts on that one?
No, I just thought that was a cool tool that people might want to look at.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I'm going to play with that. Okay, then. Well, with the news all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP@JupiterBroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of our website, or even better, starting a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And pretty soon, I'm going to have to start adding or sending a bit message, although I won't be giving out the bit message on air, but we have it in our show notes. Alan, the first one this week is actually a blog post that you spotted over on the Spiceworks blog. Got a little FreeNAS flair to it. What's going on with this one?
Basically, a story about how this guy was having a problem with his iSCSI setup, where basically the data on the NTFS partition that was writing on top of the iSCSI kept getting corrupted, and he was having a lot of trouble figuring out why. Turns out he had it mounted in two different places.
Oops.
So when he would originally set it up, he mounted it via iSCSI on his workstation and, formatted it and set it up. And he forgot to unmount it. And then he mounted it on the server and ran, it was like an email server, it was hosting his backups. And then every time he would do a test to restore it from the backup, all the files would be corrupted. And that's, it's the same idea as if, remember sometimes there were those external hard drives that had like eSATA and USB?
Yes.
And people would have the bright ideas, well, I'll connect it via USB to one computer and eSATA to the other computer, and then I can share files. It's like, no.
No. It doesn't work like that.
Right. Because NTFS assumes it has exclusive access to the drive, basically when you write files into the file system, it goes into the, on NTFS it's called the MFT, the master file table. Basically when you add a file or access a file or something on the mount on the second computer, it overwrites the MFT with what it thinks is on the drive. And that unlinks all the files you had over here. And it causes all kinds of mess. So yeah, with iSCSI, you normally don't want to allow more than one connection to each target.
Yeah, unless like you have a file system that is specifically designed Like when I started
Well, I
using,
don't even think you can have that.
so I was going to say I think the one example that I can recall that lets you do this, and I might be wrong, is VMware FS. Because I believe in VMware FS you can pull that off, but like if they specifically designed it to allow for that.
But yeah, and it's more of a like that's for active passive failover, not for active anyway,
probably yeah. So that's very good. Well, though, good.
Yeah. Anyway, it goes into detail about it and explains what happened and how he ran into it and all the good stuff.
Good stuff. All right, our first email was sent in via BitMessage. How about that? And it was from B with some file server woes. He says, "Hi, Alan and Chris. I have a resend of sorts." He figured if he sent it here, maybe I'd catch it. "I know your mail sack is overflowing, so hopefully you'll see this. I'm looking for recommendations on what to do with my file server. It's an old 1U IBM P4 box with 2 gigabytes of RAM that I've had for a few years. It currently has an 80 gigabyte hard drive with OS plus a small storage pool and a 1.5 terabyte drive attached as well. For my birthday recently, I got a 3 terabyte drive, which I plan to replace the 80 gig drive. So looking around, I found that the 3 leading NAS distributions are FreeNAS, NAS for free, and Open Media Vault, which is Debian-based. I would also throw OpenFiler in there. He says, my plan is to set up a proper NAS instead of cobbling together etc/exports by hand. So my requirements are an encrypted file system /DIS, NFS, iSCSI for HA-capable container VMs, and he says, but that's optional if it's not possible. So I'm wondering what your recommendations would be for a machine of this age and specs. I'm also testing VirtualBox, but I have not gotten either FreeNAS or NAS for free to boot there.
That's weird because I boot FreeNAS for VirtualBox all the time, and the FreeNAS developers use VirtualBox to develop it.
He says that I haven't got.
Make sure you're choosing FreeBSD 64-bit as the host, like the type when you create it in VirtualBox. But
he says if I boot into FreeNAS in the default mode, it gives me some kind of console with a D added. If I boot without ACPI or safe mode, it gets as far as a RAID module loaded, and then he gets a preload image and memroot.ufs fails.
MFS and then it's hanging.
Yeah,
I'd have to look. That seems really strange.
Yeah, but he says, from what I understand, listening to Alan on TechSNAP, without 4 gigs of RAM or more, ZFS is not necessarily a good idea. So he's wondering if we have any information, any more recommendations for a rather low-end P4-based file server.
With the 2 different sized drives, too.
Yeah. A 1.5 terabyte and a 3 terabyte drive when he's all done.
If you actually want to have more than 3 terabytes of usable storage out of that, then yeah. You can do ZFS with 2 gigs of RAM as long as the machine's still 64-bit, but it's Pentium 4, so it's probably not. So in that case, I would recommend sticking with UFS. FreeNAS has the Geli encryption, so I would recommend that over NAS for free. Also, FreeNAS 9.1 is in beta. It'll be out quite soon. That would be what I would pick because it has the newer ZFS features as well.
So I wonder if that 2 gig RAM limit is hard. I wonder if you can go up to 4, because that would only be about, especially on a machine that old, that'd probably be 25
Well, on a machine that old, the problem is that the RAM isn't cheap anymore because it's rare.
Yeah, it gets to that rare price. You're right. Yeah, maybe it wouldn't be so
That's
cheap.
probably DDR1. Although you can find it on eBay sometimes rather cheap.
In terms of specs,
from recycler.
I mean, in terms of specs and serving up NFS, this box, if you're using UFS, I think is going to have no problems doing this, right?
Oh yeah, definitely no problem.
Yeah. What about...
Like, you could probably even do ZFS. You would just have to set the arc really small and...
Yeah, I mean, if he's
the
only
main issue is just the address space.
But if he's only if he's only not even doing RAID, is it still worth it just to have like a plain Jane 3 terabyte drive hanging off, just your SATA bus?
Well,
is
depending how you're doing it. If you use ZFS with the striping mode, like the default mode with no redundancy, then you could combine the 3 and the 1.5 to make 4.5 terabytes of usable storage.
Yeah.
Although you'd have no redundancy.
Right.
ZFS provides a lot of useful features, but yeah, with anything that's not 64-bit, I would recommend against ZFS. It's the 2 gigs of RAM might be doable if the machine was 64-bit, but if it's 32, it's just not doable.
Okay. So then UFS, FreeNAS UFS. Yeah.
Yes.
Or could also check out,
look at probably at the newer FreeNAS, the beta.
Or go check out OpenFiler and look at XFS or something like that.
I suppose. If you want to
I have to. It's my duty to say that, Alan.
Right.
All right, so Tarek writes
I don't know what options they support for encrypting the file system, but FreeNAS has
Right.
GELI,
Right.
the FreeBSD disk encryption.
Wonder how that's going to be on that P4.
Although disk encryption with a P4 is probably not, that's going to kill your performance.
Yeah.
If you really want a P4, you could buy something new with an i3 or something that has the AES new instruction, so the CPU can do all the encryption in hardware instead of in software.
Yeah. I would almost say do the encryption client side. Encrypt on your workstation that's connecting to that FreeNAS server, and do the processing on your remote system, if possible.
Just because, unless performance is not a big deal. But if performance is a big deal, that Pentium 4 is not going to handle the encryption as well.
Yeah. All right, so Tarek writes in. He says, hello, Chris and Alan. I discovered LAS a few months ago and have since been an avid viewer of LAS, Unfiltered, TechSNAP, and SciByte. Well, hey. He says it's great with a perfect mix of information and entertainment. And he says he considers it to be quite professional. 2 years ago, I finished my apprenticeship as a software developer, and while I had networking classes at school, I somehow managed to pass them without really learning anything, which I now regret. Since I switched to Linux, my interest for other computing-related subjects besides programming has sparked, and I would really like to acquire some knowledge in networking, but I don't know where or how to start. Can you recommend any good resources like books, online courses, etc. for beginners? Thanks for your answers in advance, and keep up the good work. Best regards. A place to start. I have a suggestion. I'll just toss this out there.
Yep.
It's very basic, but if you want to play with things, you can actually do a lot of interesting routing experiments in virtualization. You can have a virtual machine that becomes your router, and then you can have a virtual private switch, and you can have all of the machines on this private LAN, all talking to each other, all going out through this router, without ever screwing with your main network settings, right? So you can play with DHCP, you can play with routes.
Well, we did this also for the networking, the Unix security class I taught, where we did a bunch of stuff with doing NAT and setting up transparent proxies to stop people from going to Facebook and things like that. You will learn
so much figuring that stuff out.
Yeah, so we would set it up so there'd be like two clients and the router, and they'd all be a virtual LAN, or you could even set it up with multiple hops. And yeah, it's like originally this was all done in the labs at the college, where there'd be like 8 rows of computers. They're actually, two sides of the room, and they called them separate rows. But anyway, so they had these 8 rows of computer, and each one had a switch, and then that switch was connected to the back of the room, where there was this punch-down block that you could alternate the cables with, and it would either bridge them all together via the switch or isolate each row behind a row server.
Cool.
So at the very back of the room, there was a separate server for each row.
Cool.
That had 2 NICs, one for the LAN side and one for the WAN side. And then on those, you could set up routers and do stuff.
Yeah.
But part of the problem with doing the exam in that situation was that people had to work as a group with everybody in their row. So it was harder to get an individual mark for each person.
Right, yeah.
So once virtualization came around and everybody could build that entire network setup inside their own computer, the class got a lot better, and people stopped being able to get through past the class without learning it, because they wouldn't be riding on their group handling it. They would have to do it themselves. Yes, the stuff you do with virtualization now is amazing.
That's a good place to start. Books? You got any books off the top of your head?
No, I've never read any books.
Yeah, I don't know if, gosh, I mean, the books that I read back in the day was back when NetBEUI and IPX were still popular. So right. I don't have any current book recommendations, because I don't think you want that information. I think at least for me, and this everybody's learning style is different, but for me, goal-based learning seems to work the best. Set myself up an objective, maybe I want to do a proxy, something like that.
I wanted to build something.
Yeah, then you'll connect all the dots you need in order to accomplish that goal. You'll be motivated to go down the rabbit hole you need to go down to learn how to do the thing. And then once you kind of get some of that, once you kind of figured out some of that, you'll probably have a better idea of where you need to sort of fill in the gaps at.
Yep.
But if anybody has any recommendations, we'd always like to hear them, because this is kind of like a semi-common question.
Something like that, because it was interesting to watch, to understand how networking works, to watch packets as they go through a series of routers that you set up. Like if you set up 3 or 4 virtual machines with 2 NICs each, and the first NIC is NATed to the internet, and the second NIC is a private LAN with the first NIC of the second machine, and then the second NIC of the second machine is a private LAN with the first NIC of the third machine, and then to the fourth machine. When you send a packet and it goes through all those networks and gets to the first one, you can see how the IP address stays the same at every hop, but the MAC address changes at every hop.
Yeah.
And basically, it's this concept of internet packets are like envelopes within envelopes, right? So you have the message you're sending and you put it in an envelope, and you send it to your operating system. Your operating system says, all right, you want to, send this picture to somebody. So then it breaks it up into reasonably sized chunks and puts those as like an IP packet or a TCP packet. And then the TCP packet goes in an IP packet, which then goes in an Ethernet frame and goes over the network. And then your router opens up the Ethernet frame, looks at the address on the IP packet, says, oh, I know where this is going, puts it in a new Ethernet frame envelope and sends it on. And as it goes up and down the stacks to different degrees until it gets to the very end, and you keep opening all the envelopes until you get the message back.
And that is envelope inception, as the chat room says.
Yeah, that's it's the OSI model to networking.
Now, the chat room has provided a couple of recommendations. First one came from Dead Beef. Guide to TCP/IP, $154.
Yeah.
And then also, there was another recommendation that came from Tox, he provided us with the Linux Advanced Routing and Traffic Control Guide, which you could follow as well. Good stuff. All right. Next question, Alan. But yeah, I would like to hear people's suggestions. We get that a lot. Comes from Silverax. Says, what happens if you get hit by a bus? He says, hi, Chris and Alan. In TechSNAP 117, there was a question from Boston. Basically, he put the word basically in so many times that you basically missed the actual question. And that's a shame, because I think it was a good question. He wasn't asking how you back up your data. That's what you answered. He was asking what happens if you get hit by a bus. I've been working about this issue myself. A lot of my important stuff is, for instance, in a few KeyPass databases. And I've been thinking about putting, say, a sealed envelope somewhere with some instructions on letting a close relative know about it. That way, if something bad would happen, they could at least get access to some of my stuff. What do you think? Have you given any specific precautions to this? If you could revisit Boston's question, I think that would be great. Really like the show. Keep it up. Basically, please don't forget you might get hit by a bus. Best regards.
He says, please don't get hit by a bus.
Oh, I was editorializing.
Dyslexic.
What do you think, Al? Do you plan for that?
Somebody in the chat room is wrong.
Uh-oh.
Layer 3 is not TCP IP. TCP is layer 4. IP is layer 3.
Oh, goodness.
Difference.
Phew, I'm glad that was...
question.
Woo. All right.
Well, I can't... They would be teaching the wrong thing. Do that. Anyway, so the question about getting hit by a bus. Part of it is, business disaster planning, right? So for Scale Engine, we had to think about these type of things. Because, at one point, something like this kind of happened. It wasn't this bad, but my business partner got very sick, and for about a week, I couldn't reach him, basically.
Oh.
And at this time, we were both working as consultants, and we were kind of working together, but not that closely. And so one of his clients had a problem with their SQL server, and it was Microsoft SQL, which I didn't know anything about, and I didn't know how to solve their problem for them. I couldn't reach my business partner to help, and I'm like, I don't know anything about your setup. I don't have access to any of your machines. And so after that, we've kind of come up with a system with a bunch of GPG encrypted files with both keys, where we keep access to a lot of that type of information. So if one of us is unavailable, the other one will have access to the things they need to do things.
That's a nice approach. I would like that. I've been trying to think too of would I want stuff to auto-destruct. I don't know what would be, but I was just trying to think, do I have anything that I would want to have auto-destruct? I don't think so.
Well,
but there's that aspect of it
auto-destruct is hard to do, but yeah, if you do, encrypt it with a key and only you know the password and you don't write it down, then it's destructive when you are.
Yeah. I have not given enough proper thought to this particular topic, especially when it comes to business.
What stuff you want your family to be able to have access to and what stuff you don't want your family to have.
I just figured they have access to everything, but I don't have any way to give that access right now. I don't have anything lined up. My bigger problem is what happens if, I get sick for a week, because there's a lot of things that won't happen if I'm sick for a week, including 7 shows. So I have, when it comes to business continuity, I am not the right person to ask. However, right. I have a couple of categories of things that even now my wife knows the passwords to them, so she could get pretty far. There's a couple of things that are really super secure that I just have really complicated passwords that she just would never be able to memorize, so she doesn't have them. That's kind of been my backup plan. Those
outside of the stuff specifically for our business, no one has access to any of my stuff.
Yeah, I think that happens a lot, and it's going to happen a lot more.
Right. Well, part of that's on purpose. But,
I know. Yeah, it's just people are going to pass, and there'll be these vaults of information that are completely locked down.
Yeah. My family wouldn't know what to do if I got hit by a bus.
Well, they could contact the NSA.
They wouldn't know what to do with. They wouldn't know what to do with my computer or anything.
Right.
Or which data was on it. So I imagine, yes, they would get in contact with my business partner and give him the hard drive or whatever, and be like, "There's some business stuff on here, I'm sure."
Yeah. All right. You want to solve Matthew's FreeBSD NIC trouble?
So, I don't have that much of a plan for that. If you have ideas, you could write them in, I suppose. But
yeah, I'm thinking about it.
In general, that's very dependent on your situation, and so
yeah.
But yeah, certain information like that in an envelope, you might consider putting it with a lawyer rather than a family member. But again, it comes down to, if the government's coming after you, you also want it to be with someone who's not going to be easily persuaded to hand it over.
So here's what I've done, is on my HTC One, every 15 minutes I have to check in. And if I don't check in, it just automatically tweets all my passwords. So that's what kind of like my dead man switch. Now, I'll tell you, last night I tweeted about 100 times. No, I'm kidding. All right, we should answer Matthew's question because
yes.
he's stuck up FreeBSD Creek right now, but I think you might have some advice. He says, "Hey, Chris and Alan, I'm having an issue with FreeBSD 9.1. It's a router I built. I'm using vanilla FreeBSD in PF, not PFSense, because I wanted to learn how to set it up manually." He says, "Anyway, the WAN NIC is Intel, and it uses the EM driver. The problem I'm having is that seemingly at random, I'll get messages in syslog that say, 'Watchdog timeout, resetting.' I've done some research, and for some reason, when this occurs, it causes my internet connection to go down until I reboot the machine. I've tried just downing and upping the NIC, but that doesn't seem to work. I've also disabled MSI and MSIX because from research, I've seen that this can cause the problem. And while it helped, that's interesting, it didn't completely resolve the problem. Any help would be
appreciated." Well, it happens so randomly, it's hard to tell what's happening. Yeah. I used to get that problem with some VIA NICs that I had in my very first server. And that was really annoying.
Were they on board?
Sorry, they were Realtek, and I replaced them with VIA because that solved the problem.
Okay.
But I've had Intels like maybe 2 or 3 times over like 3 or 4 years where they've just conked out, where they don't give the watchdog message. Normally when you get that watchdog message, the Intel driver is saying, "Hey, nothing's going back and forth across this interface. It's probably supposed to be, I'm going to reset the interface and hope that fixes it."
And so maybe that resets where it's breaking?
Well, no. It's doing the reset because it was already broken. That's the watchdog that checks to make sure it's not broken didn't go off. So it's like, hey, the watchdog timed out. I'm going to reset it.
It's interesting that downing and upping the interface doesn't fix it. He has to reboot the whole
Well, it depends
machine.
how he's downing and upping it. If he's just doing the regular if config up-down, that's administratively, not hardware.
Oh, okay.
So what I recommend is the netif command. So if you do service netif restart and then optionally a list of the network interfaces, it will do a hard down and up. Like it'll actually drop the carrier and pick it up again. And that has, for me in the past, kicked the interface back to working.
Do you think this is just hardware dying?
That's what it does seem sometimes. I've had a couple NICs that have acted goofy.
Yeah.
But I've never had it happen reliably. It kind of it reminds me of that story we talked about months ago where if you sent that certain series of SIP packets, it would cause the NIC to go offline.
Yeah, that is a
Remember
good
that
point.
One? It was insane.
It does almost seem like something's freaking it out because it's happening sort of not with a cadence, but it is happening more than say once a week. It's like
I have this one machine named Bravo, and it's done it maybe 5 or 6 times since I bought the machine in 2009. And it's under fairly heavy traffic all the time, so it's never seemed to make any rhyme or reason to what happened. It just might be, when a certain bit is 4 in a certain offset, it screws it up, right?
I've never really had an Intel NIC that I didn't like. I'm a pretty big fan of Intel networking hardware for it's in my FreeNAS box.
Because I actually had a server do this thing, except for without the watchdog error, just the NIC stopped responding. Actually happened to me today. like this morning when I was before I started reading TechSNAP.
Yeah, because of the lightning.
My servers in Dallas. No, this was unrelated.
Oh,
so one of our servers in Dallas, all of a sudden, I got Nagios is like, "Hey, that server's offline." So I log in over the IPMI, and there's packets coming in, but the outgoing traffic is 0.00 bits per second.
Let me ask you this,
so
Alan.
I ran these commands: netf restart, routing restart, and it came back to life.
What's the what is MSIX and MSI? Because Jez in the chat room says disable MSIX, but not MSI.
It's like interrupt moderation. So basically, normally what a network card does is every time a packet comes in, it puts up an interrupt and says, "Hey, CPU, I need attention."
Right.
And so these ones basically allow you to moderate that so that it doesn't happen quite so often.
Okay.
So a solution that you might want to check out for this box that's having that problem, other than just putting a different NIC in it if you can, is polling. Right? We talked about this with somebody who was having this issue a couple of weeks ago. And we talked about polling.
Yeah.
And with that, the FreeBSD kernel will ask the network card every so often whether it's having has packets or not. That way, the MSI, MSIX stuff shouldn't come into play as much.
Do you know if any kind of device polling was changed in 9.1? Maybe he's having a 9.1 specific issue.
No. Well, polling is on by default, so it won't be polling this specific.
Oh, okay. I see.
The Intel driver was updated, but I think that fixed issues, not added some.
Okay.
You might try 9.2 beta 0, which isn't official. It's just one Colin Percival rolled for Amazon. But if you check out 9 stable or one of the beta snapshots when it comes out, maybe the next week or two, and see if that solves it as well.
I wonder if running pfSense for a week too, just to test it. I mean, that's kind of why you roll your own, right? Is to test like this kind of stuff out. So
yeah, pfSense is based on 8 point something, so it'll be a different, older version of the Intel driver, and if that solves it. But the hardest part is you won't know if it solved it, because it's not like this is happening on a regular routine. It just happens randomly.
Right.
So just because it doesn't happen for a month doesn't mean it's fixed.
Yeah. Jeez.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's one of these fun ones.
Restart command that normally kicks the NIC back, although because it takes the IP address away and puts it back, it kills your default route. So you also have to do a routing start so that it adds your default gateway back.
Okay, so stop with the if up, if down stuff. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, basically, there's no if up, if down commands, but there's if config interface up or down.
You know what I mean.
But that's administratively up or down.
Yeah.
That's not actually a hardware up or down. It doesn't actually drop the carrier or anything.
I bet you that'll help it right there. At least that'll get him back up and running faster.
Yeah. And the fun part is doing those over SSH. Because when you do the netf restart, after it stops the NIC, your SSH session gets dropped.
Right, yeah. Right. Yeah.
And the shell script will stop there when it gets
Yep.
So you have to like wrap the whole thing in a no-hup or something, or put it in a screen or something so that it finishes. Otherwise, even if the first script finishes and it starts the interface back up, it won't have a default route, and you'll only be able to access it from the can.
Yeah, that's a good use case for screen right there.
Yeah.
All right, next email. You ready?
Whatever. Yep.
Piotr writes in, I think I probably got that wrong. He says, after listening to dozens of TechSNAP podcasts, I finally decided to give pfSense a try. So I started to look for some hardware. Now, I will read the rest of this question, but there's not so much a question in here, but maybe we'll just take from it what we like. I know I can use an old netbook or a PC, but what I actually want is extremely stable Wi-Fi. So I'm looking for something with 2 or even 4 Wi-Fi antennas. He says he's considering maybe doing like a couple, just one dedicated to N, maybe one dedicated to BG, etc. I have several computers and CCTVs running on Wi-Fi in a mixed GN modes, and my current router stalls on Wi-Fi, sometimes causing havoc, especially when I start to copy a big file from a PC to PC. Something that has at least 2 LAN ports would be nice. I also would love to use all of these amazing features plugins that come with a box like pfSense, but my stupid OEM router just won't let you do it. Thanks for the great show. So I guess he's kind of asking for hardware advice.
A little bit.
Which we've done before. I would say, here's my route. Go with a tower PC and go with PCI-based Wi-Fi cards that have...
And basically go look at the FreeBSD hardware
compatibility
list of what's actually known to work.
But you know what I would say is don't get the PCI cards that have
pfSense 2, you'd have to double check.
What?
pfSense is based on an older version of FreeBSD, although they backport some of the network
So you think there
drivers,
could be some
you have to
Wi-Fi?
look at like 8.2. So you have to look at the Wi-Fi that's been supported for a while, not just the stuff that's been added in the last 6 months.
Okay. I wonder if pfSense breaks that out on their own, because that could limit
They
its
do,
choices
or
right
it's
there.
based on the release notes for every version of FreeBSD are on the website, so you just have to look for the one that's for the version of FreeBSD that pfSense is using.
All right, so I don't
whatever
know.
version of pfSense you're on.
I don't know how current this is, but they do on their wiki have a supported wireless drivers.
Yeah, well, then that'll definitely be current to the latest version of pfSense.
I would recommend a PCI card that has connectors for external antennas, so the antennas aren't hanging off the back of the case, and then you can move those antennas
put them
up
somewhere useful.
Yeah. So I would go that route. I would put. I also in my house I have N on its own separate router, and I have G
well,
on
you
its
can
own.
put them on. Yeah, you can put them both on the pfSense, but by having the separate N and G, that will help a lot because basically N has to slow down if you're using G.
Right.
As well.
Most OEM routers, if you have G devices or B devices on your network, your N will just fall down to 2.4 and it'll run at 2.4 gigahertz, and you're not getting 5 gigahertz, you're not getting the additional speed, you're not getting the range, and honestly,
that's kind of a limitation of sharing the radio.
Yeah, and honestly, that's what I think when he mentions like he's doing large file copies and all his wireless just goes to crap. That's what he's seeing right there. So he's on the right track. He's making the right choices.
And that's exactly the reason why my house is wired with Cat 6A.
Yeah. Seriously, I have right here. I have a Cat 5 cable sitting on this desk because when I'm doing shows, it is why wireless is good, but it's just not stable enough for when I'm doing production. Every now and then it'll crap out or a web page won't load correctly. So I have Cat 5 everywhere in my house. In my living room, I have a freaking gigabit switch in my living room because every single media device that I ever want, my PS3, my Roku, my Boxy, I have them wired in too. I don't use wireless for anything except for portable mobile devices and maybe a laptop on occasion. And he's using it for CCTV. And, I could see that. I could see if I had cameras around the house that were on Wi-Fi, I might set up a separate router just for those cameras. The other route you might go, Piotr, is instead of doing pfSense, you could go on eBay and get some used Wi-Fi routers that allow you to load DDWRT or Tomato, give you a little more power.
Or the WatchGuard fireboxes are pre-built and can run pfSense. And they have like 5 or 6 links in them usually.
Those are slick too. Those are really slick. So that might be another way to go. In fact, I almost went that way. I decided to go with the new pfSense box I'm building. I'm going with a 1U rack mount server, but I almost went with the Firebox. All right. I think that was our last email. So why don't you tell us about this Lightning War story of yours?
Yes. So yesterday, while I was chatting away in the chat room, about half an hour before this time of the day, it was at 5:11 p.m. There was a very loud lightning strike very close to me. I'm not sure exactly where, but obviously I was just sitting here. It was quiet. There'd be a couple of rumbles, but no serious thunder even. And it was not really raining hard or anything. I was just, and it just crashed. I almost jumped out of my skin.
Wow.
And the lights went out, and my UPS starts beeping, and the lights came back on.
Did you realize what it was right when that happened, when the lights went out? Or were you still wondering?
Yeah, well, I heard the crash. I knew that it was thunder. It just had shocked me.
Yeah.
And the lights went out and back on, and the UPS beeped a couple times, but it was fine. But my mouse and keyboard stopped working.
Uh-oh.
And I was like, huh? I'm like looking around, and I'm like, the backlight and the keyboard's not on anymore. Something's hinky. And I looked, basically I waited around a minute and looked. Yeah, the clock beside my computer says it's now 5:13, and the computer still says it's 5:11. The computer is completely frozen.
Yeah.
So I hit the reset button, and it boots up. And I log in, and
no network.
Can't get to the internet.
Uh-oh.
What's going on here?
Uh-oh.
Pull up network interfaces. No network interfaces. Uh-oh. So I look around the back of the computer, and the Ethernet cable's plugged in, and the link light is on.
Link light's on. Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I unplug the cable, and the link light doesn't go out.
Oh. Link light's still on when the cable's out?
Yeah. Plugged it back in. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go downstairs and check the switch. Go downstairs, and my nice, fancy, rack-mountable 24-port gigabit switch, which normally has like 72 dancing little lights on it.
Yeah.
It's just dark. No lights.
Oh, no.
Unplug it, plug it back in, nothing. Won't start.
Oh, no.
So I'm like, put that aside. Come upstairs. In a closet somewhere, I had a 5-port gigabit switch that used to run my house before I moved and bought the 24-port.
Yeah.
It just happened to have not been in use because I had the 24-port. Hook it up, get a couple computers back online. My computer still won't work. I went into the BIOS, tried disabling and re-enabling the NIC just to try to kick it. No luck.
Yeah. That's exactly what I would do.
Enabled Pixie boot, which was normally turned off just because I don't Pixie boot, so I didn't waste the time during the boot sequence.
So you thought maybe, but I'll just write something to the ROM or something, right? It's kind of what you're thinking. Just
and not just that, but see if the problem is Windows or the hardware.
Oh, okay.
And, so I tried, and it's like, no, can't get a link, even though there is a switch at the other end, and there's a link. It wouldn't find the link. So, yeah. And yeah, so my switch was behind its own UPS. It's a 350 VA APC downstairs in the wiring closet. And then my file server and pfSense box are on a 1500 VA UPS, and my one up here is on a 1300 VA UPS. So all of them are on UPSs, so I don't think the problem got into the system via the power. So as people in the chat room say, it might have actually been induction on the Cat6 Ethernet cables strung all over my house, which basically may have just turned my house into a giant antenna.
So you think it might have just entered in some point at the Ethernet?
The Ethernet somewhere, and that fried the switch, the NIC in my computer. The interesting thing is how it was kind of selective and random.
Yeah.
So in my rack in the corner of my basement, there's my pfSense box, which has 300 megabit network cards. All three wired back into the same switch, the one that died. The one that was connected to a small VLAN on the switch that goes to the cable modem, that NIC died. Won't work now. But the other two NICs were fine. How does that happen?
I mean, the only thing I would think that would mandate where the electricity would go would be grounding, as far as I know.
So the same machine, and it's got 3 Ethernet cables coming from the same place.
How does it pick which one? How does it, yeah.
How does one die and the other two don't? Then in my file server, 2 onboard NICs. They're literally like side by side on the motherboard, right? One's active and one didn't have much on it. The one that wasn't in use got fried.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And so on my computer, I had to tear it apart, pull my sound card out, and put a spare gigabit NIC into it, and get that hooked up.
Had to sacrifice the sound card.
Temporarily. I've ordered 4 PCI Express gigabit NICs to replace the NICs that got fried.
Wow, man.
So yeah, anyway, so I got my machine back online. The file server is just down to 1 of 2 interfaces. I hadn't got around to setting up the lagging that I wanted to set up to be able to push more out of the box anyway. So that's not a big deal at this point. And
that's true. Cat6 is supposed to be more shielded too. Something must have hit.
Well, 6 and 6A aren't really more shielded. Well, a little bit. They have this spleen that separates the twisted pairs, so there's less crosstalk.
Yeah.
But
no, I don't know if that might not do anything.
Shielded cable, it's not shielded and grounded.
Yeah.
Right. The only shielded cable, like STP, will actually have a ground connector. 6A does not have shielding from outside.
Someone in the chat room is wrong. Wow, Alan, that's a war story that kind of has a bummer ending because you got to go buy a bunch of hardware.
So also, I haven't ordered them yet, but I'm looking at just a couple of weeks ago, my friend Dan, who runs the BSDCan conference, was showing he bought these little, it's an APC surge protector for Ethernet.
Yeah, okay.
Got Ethernet on each side and a grounding cable, and you hook it up to the ground or whatever, right?
I've seen these.
And I was like, you didn't need that, do you? That wouldn't.
I've always thought that too.
Ethernet would be fine. And Zorch. All my stuff. Now, my UPS has the Ethernet thing on it, although I'm not sure if it's actually gigabit or not. I think it just passes it through, so it should be fine. But when I was first setting up my house here, I was kind of short on a few Ethernet cables. So I didn't bother because it would take a second cable, right?
Exactly.
So, and I'm like, well, that can only cause more attenuation and lower the speed or whatever. Yeah. So when the new NIC comes, I'm rewiring everything so that all the machines that are anywhere near UPS will go through the UPS, and also probably get some of those APC surge protectors for the Ethernet for the important things.
Yeah.
Especially the cable modem.
Oh.
I'd want to isolate so that if something comes out over the coax for the cable, it fries the modem, but it doesn't continue on through and hit my switch.
Right.
Because that's like a $300 switch that got fried.
Yeah, so
But again, I don't know what the problem was specifically, but I tore the switch apart, and there's like no scorch marks or anything obviously wrong with it. So I kind of think it didn't come through the power. Although I can't tell, if it's some bit of the board that's fried or not. It's just this particular one doesn't even have a fan, so I can't tell if the power supply is working, and I don't want to go sticking my finger in it or something, right?
Huh. Yeah, now I'm kind of rethinking my setup because my main switch.
And I have some APC power bars that have coax protection and stuff.
I have everything I have. Like my main switch is on a surge protector. But the actual Ethernet I've never really. I don't even use my UPS ones because I have the same exact thought process you just listed.
Hopping Mad Patty says that if it came in by the power lines, I've major damage. Possibly, but also probably not at the same time because I have UPSs on everything. Because my problems have always been with power. But yeah, this is honestly it's the first time I've ever had any lightning damage of any kind. Mm-hmm. Like I never even lost a dial-up modem back in the day, and my friend would like lose one every month.
Man, you Canadians have a lot of lightning.
I would connect it through my UPS.
Yeah, I did my modems through the UPS too.
My little UPS that sits by my cable modem doesn't have the coax because it's so old. It doesn't. People had dial-up, not DSL back then,
right?
Or cable.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Then of course your house could just get directly hit by lightning.
Hopping that, Patty, my UPSs are designed to sacrifice themselves.
Right. That's their job. Yeah. Well, good stuff. Okay, so a little bit.
I've also seen some people recommend, if they have the problem consistently, as an air gap measure on eBay, you could buy media converters. So at some point, you take your Ethernet, you plug it into this media converter that converts it to fiber, and then a short piece of fiber, and then another one back to Ethernet. And because you're switching to light, instead of, there's no path for electricity across that air gap. So at worst, you fry those media converters, but the blast doesn't go down your Ethernet cable.
Right. Now you got me thinking, Alan. All right.
UK, why would you wish I looked happier? I just had all my shit fried. I'm not happy.
He's like, what? Is somebody in the chat room giving you a hard time, Alan? That's uncalled.
They're like, you should look happy. It's like, I'm not happy. My stuff got fried.
Oh, all right. Well, if you want to send us some feedback, email us techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. Hit the contact link. You can also do that, and then just choose TechSNAP in the drop-down, or start a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv, and we'll read them in next week's episode. There was a couple emails we didn't get to this week, so those I'll try to get those included in next week's feedback segment. But Alan, with the feedback all done.
Sensitivity, GFI outlets don't really help.
You interrupted the roundup toss for that?
Yes.
You can correct him in just a second. See, what people who don't watch live don't know is when we go in between segments, while you get some pretty music and some fancy bumps, Alan and I sometimes get up, we scratch, we take a pee, Alan yells at the chat room for a few minutes. This is why you got to show up live over at jblive.tv on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 Eastern. And jblive.tv, join our chat room and talk with us as we go. But Alan, okay, all right, we're all done with the feedback. It's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that we didn't quite pack into the very top of the show, but we still want to talk about them, give you some links to follow up on your own. Yep. A lot of these links, most of the time, are provided by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Alan, this week, most of the links were provided by you. Just browsing around and saving them up for the show because we've been
my pinboard was full of stuff that hadn't been covered in previous weeks, and I just dumped it all in here.
We gotta cover it.
Never mind. There's no room for my stuff. Alan took all the space.
That's all right. I don't mind. So this first story is a little cyber vandalism story. It sounds real scary.
Well, kind of. Well, originally that's what it was.
Okay.
So it's the attacker who back in December compromised the .pk domain registry.
Yeah.
And basically rerouted traffic from like Google.pk and other big domains
I remember
to
that.
a defaced site.
We've covered some really interesting stories.
Right. That particular guy now claims that he has access to the Federal Investigation Agency's servers, which is Pakistan's internal security agency, and a few other government agencies.
What?
In particular, the FIA's servers contain files on every citizen in Pakistan.
Well, that's
So if he actually has access to that, that's
a bit of a breach.
hack. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, he's claiming to be the world's best hacker. He told the author of the report in an interview, which he conducted via instant messaging services. He particularly mentioned the Pakistani hackers Zombie Casa and a script kiddie who said have hacked Google a few times, according to this guy. I don't know how much I buy of this, but even if it's half legit, that's a pretty big deal. Explaining how he gained access to the website servers, Ebos said he used different methods. Pakistan is not secure as it claims to be, he said. SQL injection technique used to attack the website can be used to inject and spawn shell backdoors, he said. He says that he's getting shell access from SQL injections.
Well, probably not SQL per se, but yeah.
Yeah. All right, now this is a story that's straight out of SciByte, but even the Mars rover has a TechSNAP angle.
Well, this is one of the older rovers, not the current one. This one's from quite a few years ago. But anyway, it's a story about how the logistical problems they had debugging a problem on the software because it was on Mars, and so the latency was high and the bandwidth was low. And in particular, they were running this VxWorks OS, and they have a very small CPU, so they have this scheduling system that gets to decide what runs when. Right, so there's certain high priority things that will pause other processes and take over. But at one point, one of those was taking up all the time and not letting anything else happen. And so they had problems trying to fix it. And it kind of walks through the problems and some of the interesting things that were learned. And just
With visuals.
it's just a cool thing to read.
Yeah. All right, so that'll be a link for people to check out in the show notes. Yep. Nintendo detects nearly 24,000 illicit logins on a fan site. Now, a fan site's kind of the key word that has my interest here.
Well, so this is a site that Nintendo runs.
Oh, okay.
And they said there were 15 million login attempts, but 24,000 of those succeeded. And because they saw a very small number of attempts against each account, they assumed what happened is somebody compromised some other site, got the password database, and then tried that entire database against the Nintendo site.
Oh, yeah, sure, of course.
And that's how they got into a whole bunch of accounts on the very first try. Because people use the same password at some site and this Nintendo fan site. So yeah, don't reuse the same password and this won't happen to you. But yeah, so 24,000 plus people had their Nintendo accounts hacked because they used the same password on the site as they did on some other site.
Last pass, people. Last pass.
Yeah.
Last pass. All right, well, good work, Nintendo, catching that. So, this emergency radio broadcast story, where somebody is supposedly hacked, like this is an emergency transmission.
Nope, you skipped two stories.
Oh, all right, tell me, because Chrome's got all the tabs messed up.
Yeah, the 911 dispatch system, which is similar but not the same thing.
All right. Oh, okay.
Yes. So the 911 dispatch system in Detroit went down last Friday and was down for 15 hours. And their backup system didn't kick in.
So this is,
so they had to fall back to routing their emergency calls through the state system, but they couldn't route all calls because they would risk overwhelming the state system and taking it down as well.
Yeah, well.
So apparently the backup system hadn't been tested in over 2 years. And so no surprise it didn't work when it was supposed to kick in. So Motorola was the vendor for this, and they got it back online by the late Friday night, and then said, yeah, we'll investigate on Monday. It's like, no, you'll investigate all weekend. So no details yet, but the 911 dispatch system. So you could call 911, but the operators had, or the police had trouble communicating with the officers in the field. And so since there was no way for police to call for backup, they always had to travel in groups. And this meant that it was harder to respond to the volume of calls they got and so on.
Everything needs to be tested. Not a backup system unless you're testing it.
And so there's some big questions about, the maintenance contract they have with Motorola and so on.
Busted.
Apparently the maintenance company goes out and checks the antennas once a month and everything. But something failed and this backup system didn't kick in.
Well, you know it's a big roundup when Chrome reorders my tabs on me, because that's so many stories.
Yeah,
but
Neil
I
Holler,
think...
as was commenting about it, the 911 system wasn't down. People could call 911.
It was the dispatching aspect.
The
right?
police dispatchers just couldn't talk to the individual police officers. They had to fall back to using cell phones and things like that.
That's pretty crazy. At least they had that.
Yeah.
So, federal judge rejects state secrets claims in the EFF case and allows the EFF case to proceed, right? Is it?
Yes.
Do I have the right order now? I think I fixed it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, has been, had a case against the government since the George W. Bush administration about illegal surveillance and wiretapping.
Funny.
But this was the AT&T story from way, way, way back.
Yeah.
And so they started a lawsuit about it, and the state had been trying to block this, claiming that, government secrets would be exposed if this went to trial. And now that those secrets are exposed anyway, I suppose, the federal judge says, no, that's not a good enough argument, and said the case can go forward.
Which is great news.
Yes.
Because this is really, when the system works, this is when it works its best, is when you do legal challenges through the system, and then the correction to the system is done.
That's what the EFF is all about.
Let's hope, right? Let's hope this actually works, because I think there's a lot of people
Also,
out there.
they picked up, I think Bruce Schneier is on the board there now.
Oh, really?
So they have more in-house...
security expertise.
Security expertise, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Now, this is the story I was thinking of, is this root SSH key compromising the emergency alerting system. Tell me what's going on here.
So, the emergency broadcast system, which can cut in and take over TV stations.
This is a test.
Yeah, and remember that a couple months back, the one in Montana got hacked and somebody put out an alert about the zombie apocalypse.
Yes, yes.
Turns out that this was because the root SSH key was compromised. So every one of the devices from this one manufacturer, you can log in as root if you have this key. And that key appears to exist on every one of these devices. So you gain access to one, you copy the key, and now everybody has the key.
Now, we've talked about this before.
But, well, it seems it's weird because the details weren't all there, but it looked from the screenshots they had that the private key was sitting on every device too as part of the firmware image. Like, I understand the public key being on the firmware image so that they can log into it, but the private key being the same on every single device and existing on every device so you can just copy it, that seemed weird. Also, there are many other security problems with the device, including the fact that all the log files are accessible over HTTP by anonymous users.
Are you serious? Wait a minute. The private key is embedded in the firmware, and by default...
all the logs are in a directory on HTTP. If you just know the IP address in the subdirectory, you can browse through it.
Who the hell writes this software? And why are these people not
I don't know who gets
fined
these
or thrown in
contracts.
jail?
All
I mean,
of these devices that the government uses to run critical infrastructure systems, like the rugged comms and these, I forget the name of these, but the DAS systems. I don't know how they get these contracts.
well, the other thing this article points out is not only is the key included in the firmware, but it looks like by their analysis by this IO Active company, the analysis from this IO Active company says it's actually hard coded to be this key. Like, it's written to the operating system in that firmware. So, like, they couldn't even, like, they'd have to update the entire OS on all of the devices to change that key. And of course,
they've done that, but not all the customers have updated yet for one reason or another.
Well, hopefully they've just unplugged these things from the internet.
Well,
probably not as useful.
They're supposed to be plugged into the internet so that it's all automated. Yeah.
Damn it!
Lots of fun.
All right. U.S. agency baffled by modern technology and destroys mice to get rid of viruses. $170,000 worth of PCs.
This one was very popular in the chat room all week.
Yeah.
The U.S. Economic Development Administration got a notice from U.S. CERT / the Department of Homeland Security saying, hey, you have some malware, you need to fix that. These guys overreacted and started destroying the machines. They also unplugged themselves from the internet and shut off their mail server because there was some malware in an email, like some spam email. So they just turned the mail server off and said nobody can have email. And they physically destroyed the computers, including like the mice and stuff.
How is it that we have...
Now, it's interesting, you think, well, a printer can't be a big threat, but network printers could technically have viruses written into their firmware.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've actually seen, I think we talked about that happening in one case.
Somebody took advantage of a network.
I can see there might even be a justification to destroy a printer. But
A mouse? A monitor?
Oh, I guess
the camera.
Some mice now have storage in them to remember profiles, but those
probably not their cheap ass mice.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I'm baffled, Alan, because we have a federal government who, on one end, has been ahead of all of us for 10 years on surveillance and data storage and is building zettabyte storage farms in Utah. And on the other end of that same government is so stupid that when they have viruses, they literally destroy the equipment because they're so backwards they don't know how to fix it.
Their IT department was worried that it would spread to other departments. Because, like, the audit that the Department of Commerce did found that their IT department was literally incompetent.
Well, at least...
And that's why there was so much malware in the first place.
At least it's tax dollars. At least it's just tax dollars.
And I love how they spent, like, $800,000 on some consultant to come and remove the malware and make sure we can never get malware again.
How do I get that job? How do I get to be that consultant? I want that contract.
Because it definitely sounded like it was literally just one guy, too. I'm like, oh, my God.
All right, we've got a brief that you've linked in the show notes. This has been assembled by many great minds, correct?
Yes. A bunch of famous security researchers have written an amicus brief and sent it to, I forget which court it was, where the trial of AT&T versus Weave, who's the guy who, remember that list of, what was it, iPad serial numbers or whatever?
Oh, yeah, the whole deal where they put everything right in the URL.
Right, so basically on AT&T's public website, there was basically this data dump of every iPhone or every iPad's unique identifier.
And the only reason why people didn't realize it at first is because the iPad would obfuscate the URL in this little pop-up that would come up. And so if you went to a desktop browser,
the iPad was doing all the work in the background, so you didn't see the URL.
Right.
But if you just went to the URL, you had access to every iPad that had been registered.
That signed up with AT&T's 3G service. And, of course, I was one of them. I got the iPad that had that.
This was on their public website, and they're trying to sue him under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act for misusing their website. And the security researchers are saying, if this becomes case law, this will basically make our entire industry illegal. And our industry is important to the national security of the nation.
Yeah, it really does. It sort of does put security researchers on icy ground.
If you can't change a variable in a URL or something, you can't do any type of... It would make, the PayPal bug bounty program illegal.
And this guy's in jail. This guy's
been for a while.
For figuring out something that...
that was on the public website. He didn't hack into anything.
Right.
He didn't, go around any authentication. He just accessed stuff that was on their public website.
Remember how we used to crack down... Used to crack down on hackers because we wanted to set an example, and then that setting an example just became the standard. And how does he get in jail for this? It does seem like as somebody who was affected and had my information leaked, I appreciate that he did that because it would have just continued on and people may have known, people would have figured it out. Literally all you had to do was just go to that same page in a desktop browser and you saw everything.
Yep.
So, all right, now this one I've gotten a lot of emails about, tons of G+ posts about it, and people are all over the whole spectrum. I'm curious to see where you come down on this one. Android's master key vulnerability there was this bug exposed, and now there's a checker available to, I guess, check your Android device for it. What do you think about all this, Alan?
It goes to show that the Androids need to get updates, as every computer needs to get updates.
Right.
And Apple has the advantage here because they control all of the devices. They can force the updates. But with all the vendors for Android adding their own customizations, they tend to decide to not support the older devices.
Yeah, and, I mean, this flaw goes way back.
Yeah, and some of this is, what is it, one of the U.S. government's departments is going after HTC for not updating some of their devices since it's a security vulnerability, and they know it, and they just don't want to fix it. The fix is there, they just don't want to deploy it. But yeah, between the individual vendors, like the manufacturers, like Samsung and HTC not wanting to update older devices, and the carriers purposely not wanting to update the older devices, or wanting to munge up the software by throwing their logo all over it, it causes this problem.
So the number one thing is don't download stuff from untrusted sources. Number one thing. Only use, really, if you can, only use the Play Store. Don't even have side loading turned on if you're worried about this kind of thing. Now, here's my soapbox. I'll just say this briefly because I've said it a few times now. My problem is, and even the most diehard Android fans have to admit this, the vast majority of devices affected by this will continue in operation for a couple of years without patches. Very likely to happen. And now we have portable devices that run full-fledged operating systems connected to the internet with lots of personal information and sensors on them, like cameras and microphones, that are vulnerable to attack. And it's a major attack. It's a very, 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 very serious attack if the person has the right opportunity to exploit it. And nothing's going to happen. And my main problem here is that Google has invented an operating system in the last 25 years, and they didn't think of this. And it makes me so angry that they have now reached one of the largest deployments.
They just thought that the vendors would do their part, and then they don't.
They thought very, very, very wrong. And now they have thought so wrong that it is to the detriment of the network. Now, it's not going to be some sort of catastrophe. It's not going to be like an apocalypse. But you're going to have people who get affected by this, and it does degrade the rest of the network. I think it's just really disappointing. And I wish, as smart as Google is, I wish they could have thought of a solution around this problem. I realize their business model with Android doesn't really allow for it because the OEMs are taking Android, packaging it up as their own products, and then selling it. I get that. It could have been prevented.
Right.
Microsoft figured out a way to do it. Apple figured out a way to do it. Google could have done it. They didn't.
Remember, under both the app, especially under the Apple one, Apple didn't give any control to anybody.
Right.
And now Google could have done that.
No, they couldn't
didn't want
because
to be a phone company.
they wanted to get in underneath Apple. They wanted to supersede Apple. They wanted to saturate the market. And so they bent over backwards for these OEMs and these carriers and didn't have a backbone to fight for these kinds of agreements. If you recall the history of the iPhone, every carrier said no to Steve Jobs' requirements except for Singular. You remember Singular, that little tiny wireless company that is now AT&T, the number 2 wireless company in the United States? Well, they used to be Singular, and they were the only company that would accept the iPhone's terms. And because they stood to their guns like that, now the iPhone is in a much better position security-wise than Android is. And I blame Google for this situation.
If Google had put in the OEM agreement that you can't use the trademark Android unless you follow these terms where you have to update it within 90 days of us doing a patch.
Yeah, something like that, exactly. Yeah, that would have solved something like this. And now we have, by most accounts, more deployments of Android than of Windows. And you think of the issue we have when Windows has flaws like this.
The sad part is that Android's getting a bad name when the newer stuff isn't as bad. It's just this 3-year-old stuff that OEMs are still pushing on people. And
Google's addressing it as much as they can now, I think, but it's sort of the precedent has been set. So if you have an old device, keep an eye out for it. Family members,
replacing
friends.
Android with Firefox OS.
Yeah. And watch for updates and patches, and hopefully the OEMs will step up as much as possible to fix it.
Well, because mine came all at once. Like I didn't got nothing, and then I finally went from 2.6 to 4, and then
I think I might have got an update yesterday.
Only a month later to 4.1, and then I just stalled again.
Yeah, did you get an update in the last day or so?
No, but being an old Nexus S, I don't imagine I'll get any more ever again. The hardware probably not up to too much more.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was just checking. All right. So let's talk a little about
speaking of hardware being up to stuff.
Yeah, let's talk a little more about hardware and stepping up to the next thing. ARM strategy for efficient computing. Yeah.
So ARM's basically found that as they make more and more low-power systems, they don't have the same performance, and so they can't seem to catch this critical thing where people need as low power as possible, but they also need the option to have performance at a certain amount. So they found that changing the voltage of the processor to be able to get more performance out of it just doesn't scale the way they hope it would. So they introduced this concept they call big.little, where big is spelled in lowercase and little is spelled in uppercase. It's funny.
Cute.
But basically where they will put 2 processors in a device or 2 groups of clusters of processors in a device. In the first mode, you'd have 2 small low-end processors, 4 small low-end processors and 4 higher-end processors. And it would run off the low ones until they were busy, and then it would flip over to run the faster, to actually switch chips, but keep the L2 cache, which is shared. And under this system, the OS doesn't know that it's happening. So it just works on any OS. So in that one, they basically would have, so you have 4 slow processors and 4 fast processors, and you can use one set or the other set. And that doesn't require the OS to know anything. In the middle stage, you have this idea where you have 4 pairs of processors, a slow and a fast, low, fast, low, fast, low, fast. And you can switch individually, right? So use 3 slows and 1 fast.
That is so cool. That's such a great idea.
And then under the system they want to get to, but will require custom schedulers and OSs to understand it, they could have, say, 4 slow and 2 fast and use all 4 of them at once or as needed. And yes, so NVIDIA actually came up with this concept before with their Tegra 3 processors.
Yeah.
But it's interesting for the ARM, where basically you provide multiprocessing that isn't symmetric. Right now, all the multiprocessing we see is what's called symmetric multiprocessing, right? Where we have 4 cores that are all identical, or 6 or 8 or whatever. But with this one, not all your cores would be the same speed. So the scheduler has to understand that and make use of it in a way that saves as much power as possible while getting the performance you need. And also, if the scheduler knew stuff, imagine a Linux box where if your process is niced to any positive value, it will never run on the fast processor, only on the slow one, the low power one.
Oh.
So if you're building something on your laptop, you could say, this process might need a lot of CPU, but I never want it to eat my battery, so it can only use the slow processor.
Or where this could be useful is in like low power data centers where maybe you have servers that sit idle for half the operating day, like maybe at night they're not getting used very much because everybody goes home, and they could run on the lower power processors, and then during the day when the staff arrive at the office and everybody starts logging in and pulling up all their files, it kicks into the higher performance processors as it needs to respond to their requests.
Well, newer Intel processors will shut down the cores that aren't in use.
Yeah, and do turbo boost.
Some of that. Yeah. But yeah, so this whole idea of using, instead of having one processor and under or over volting it or clocking it, having 2 separate processors so that you get that more scalability. I imagine it's got to be more expensive to buy the hardware, but if the battery savings is worth it, then it's worth it, right?
It's all about the battery. All right, well, our next story is applicable to any...
Not necessarily battery, but...
What?
Or power in general. It doesn't have to be a battery, right?
Yeah.
But just ARM is often used in mobile devices which have a battery.
I guess maybe I shouldn't be surprised that ARM is, kind of going in this direction. It's a little bit of a different attack, though. I like it. Curious to see where it goes. Maybe we'll have it in our phones soon enough.
Yep.
Now, this next story is probably applicable to anybody who's concerned about a lot of the eavesdropping stuff we've talked about. I've been looking for different secure messaging programs, and now we've got a new one that's entered the scene. And the creator, or at least the person behind it, has a bit of a reputation, too.
So it's helm.is, which is Dutch for encryption or something like that.
Secret, I believe.
Or secret, yes.
Yeah. And it's a private encrypted chat messaging client. Here, I'll play a little bit of the... there's even got a...
But yeah, so basically it's an encrypted messaging service started by one of the founders of the Pirate Bay.
Here, I'm going to...
These networks are being monitored by government
it does not appear to be open source, so I don't know that I would
The
trust it with anything.
Going to stop it.
Oh,
They're
really?
actually asking for more. That's why we decided to build a messaging platform where no one can spy on you, not even us.
I thought he's in jail. I thought he was going to jail. Anyways.
This is one of the other guys, I think. This isn't the other. This isn't the guy that's going to jail. It's one of the others. There's like 4 or 5 guys, I think.
So they're doing a kind of like a Kickstarter fundraiser, Indiegogo type thing where you can pay in Bitcoin. That's cool. And if you fund it, you unlock certain features. Like it's going to be free, but the paid version will have picture messaging.
Right, but it's not going to be open source. Otherwise, I could use the video chat without paying for it. And that's, I think, the problem with a service like this is that I don't trust it unless
you can
not necessarily but someone I trust
party can audit the
source
code. Yeah. They're at 129% of their funding goal, though. That's good. I definitely am a little disappointed to see that it's not open source.
Right.
I did not realize that.
And it does seem that their goal is to make money off of it, so.
I guess so. Yeah, I guess so. All right. Well, I'll keep an eye on it. I'm going to at least check it out. But yeah, you're right. Without the ability for a third party to audit it like that.
Specifically, we saw, what was that other one called?
CryptoCat.
CryptoCat. And they've had basically 20 different security issues where they've implemented the cryptography wrong.
Right.
And basically, it's almost never been correct. And every time it is correct, they break it.
Well, and the thing is like, that's fine for encryption software to have issues like that because, a lot of stuff will. It's really hard to get the implementation right. But if it's open source, people will find it, and they can fix it. And then you can verify that it's fixed. That's kind of a big thing.
when it's amateur mistakes over and over again.
Well,
it's
yeah.
Maybe this particular software isn't.
But you don't know if these other guys have amateur mistakes too, and that's my point. Is anybody can make amateur mistakes.
It's not open source. You can't trust it. If it's open source, it doesn't mean you can trust it, but it means you can be sure that there's a chance you can trust it. With closed source, you should never trust it.
Yeah.
If it's open, there's a chance it might actually work.
Yeah, and as pointed out by Gonzalez in the chat room, for those of you interested, you can go to watch.tpbafk.tv for the Pirate Bay documentary. Oh, this last bit of news.
English for that yet? I guess they have subtitles.
No, it's subtitles. I watched it, though. I got it as part of a Humble bundle. It's a very good story. Very fascinating. That's why I thought that guy was still in trouble.
I was interested, and then I started watching the copy I had, and it wasn't in English, and I'm like, I don't want to read it today.
Yeah, I know.
We got to run back to it. Although, normally I don't mind movies with subtitles. I've watched plenty.
Yeah, so I watched it. It was fine.
I have to do.
Now I'm waiting for the Kim.com documentary. So, Alan, did you hear the good news for the PC-BSD project? I heard downloads are going a little faster. Maybe the website might be loading a little better these days. What's going on? Have you noticed this? What's going on?
Yes. So I was talking with Chris Moore at BSDCan and
founder of the PC-BSD project.
Yes, and so we've moved all the downloads for the ISO images, the PBI directory, and the package.ng directory over to the Scale Engine CDN.
I didn't realize the PBI directory, too. That's awesome.
Yep. That one's big. It's like 380 gigs. A lot of stuff. But in particular, the reason we had that this was kind of necessary was the package.ng repos. Under the new rolling release setup that PC-BSD is going to have for 9.2, they're going to update. So basically, there'll be two versions. There's the dash release, which is based on FreeBSD-release, and then there's a rolling release, which is based on FreeBSD-stable, which is basically changed constantly, and they'll do updates more often. So the big advantage is, like, basically 9.1 came out quite a while ago now, and there have been a lot of improvements to it and bug fixes, like upgraded NIC drivers to solve problems, bunch of the support for the new compression algorithm and stuff in ZFS. But that's not in a release of FreeBSD yet, because the next release isn't going to be for at least another month. So with FreeBSD going to this rolling release, they'll get those features out to people sooner via the regular FreeBSD update mechanism. And anyway, as part of this, they're doing rolling release of packages. So if you're on the dash release, new packages on the 1st and 15th of every month. If you're on the rolling release, it'll be the 5th and 20th of every month. Distributed over the Scale and CDN, right? Right. Because the old mirror system, the problem they had is their mirror master had a 100 megabit internet connection. And all the mirrors would saturate that at 100 megabits for more than 2 weeks just for one package rebuild. Right? It's a lot of mirrors in like Japan and all over the place. And, you know, the packages just for AMD 64 is 50 gigs. Right? Because the FreeBSD ports tree has 24,000 applications in it. Yeah. That's big. And some of them, like OpenOffice, are rather large. Yeah. So with AMD 64, and they used to do i386 as well, and then multiple versions and stuff, it just basically the mirror system couldn't update quick enough. So if it was going to take more than 2 weeks for an updated set of packages to get to the mirrors, then it was just never going to work, with them trying to roll out new ones at least every 2 weeks. Right? That's cool. That's cool. PC-BSD is just copying Jupiter Broadcasting. I've been distributing my files on Scale Engine for a long time now. It's cool they caught up. We had to do some special things to get it to work, but yeah, we're making use of fancy ZFS replication and stuff, so that and a little bit of rsync, so that the entire repository changes at once. Oh, sure. Because basically it's all these files, but they have to be consistent, right? Yeah. So if Chris is in the middle of uploading the newest set of packages, you still need to be able to update off the old set. Right. Otherwise, you know, you grab a newer version of, I don't know, like Nginx, and it depends on a newer version of the Perl-compatible regular expressions library, and that's not on the repo yet, because it hasn't got uploaded yet. Did that used to happen? Because the letter P comes after the letter N. Did that used to be a thing? Well, no, it was going to be a thing, basically. Oh, yeah, I guess it would be on a traditional CDN, yeah. Right? Right. Well, also the problem on the CDN was sometimes the file changes and the file name doesn't. right? Like the Peckery is the same version, but it's been compiled fresh, and so all the modified dates are different. So the tar file is different.
Right.
Well, the package ng system has the hashes in it, and if it doesn't match, it won't accept it. Right? Because otherwise, so basically, there's this the repo file has the hash of every file, and then that's signed with a key, and you verify that, and that's how you make sure the packages are real and haven't been modified or tampered with. And so that would go wrong if we had a regular caching system. We'd have to like do a purge every time somebody uploaded new files. And so we had to do it differently. So instead of having the regular caching system, we've had to replicate the files specifically to each node using ZFS replication. Wow. And then we had to use rsync with the -- delay updates option. So it uploads all the files into a temp directory and then renames them all into place really quickly at the end. The advantage to this is with snapshot every 15 minutes, the mirrors are downloading those updates immediately and then snapping them into place all at the end. So that it doesn't have to wait for Chris to finish uploading them all before the mirror starts syncing it as well.
Yes. So that is a really nice system,
And
Alan.
if we used just rsync for the replication, rsync would copy the files twice when they got renamed.
Yeah.
But the ZFS, because it's block level, doesn't do that.
And it's appropriate that ZFS is a key part in distributing PC-BSD, too.
Exactly.
I like that aspect.
Since the newer, starting with the next version of PC-BSD, it'll be ZFS only.
Well, that's awesome. This kind of thing for, just from an end user's perspective, what they're going to see is their distribution is just...
Well, the biggest difference is...
Everything's faster.
But a lot of the old mirrors only had 100 megabits.
Yeah.
With me having a 100 megabit connection at home, I'm like, why am I only getting 500 kilobytes a second instead of 3 or 4 megabytes? But the other thing was the old system just wouldn't be able to handle the frequency of the updates they wanted.
Right.
And lastly, you had to pick a mirror.
Yeah.
Manually. And
That's
if that
so
mirror went
old
away,
school.
you had to go and update it.
Yeah, that's so
right?
old school.
And so with the CDN, it's all geo-routed, so it does it all automatically.
Geo-routing is the way to go. And if you think about it, like, we're all totally comfortable selecting the mirror we want to download from, but for a new user, when you go to a download page, and then you see like a list of 10 or 15 or even 25 or 30 different places you can download it from, it's overwhelming. So just one link downloads
There's
it.
just a link, and it starts downloading right away.
It's a beauty. That is a beauty. Well, that's really cool. And it was cool to see the PC-BSD project blog about it, too.
Yep.
All right. Well, so a couple of bits of business before we run, Alan. I want to remind folks to go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar frequently because my wife is in the baby zone. I wasn't kidding when we started. We actually thought she was going into labor today, and my first thought was TechSNAP's going to be delayed. I hope it doesn't happen. But you never know. So go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar. We're also going to be putting a couple of the other shows on hiatus until the first week of September. Those changes will be reflected on the calendar as well. Assuming no baby arrives in the meantime, join us live on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is
4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC.
Boom. And you can join us at jblive.tv for the video or jblive.info for an audio-only stream, which has a 3G-friendly version of the stream for you commuters as well. So you can listen in the car.
Nice.
Little TechSNAP on the go. Don't forget, you can also email us, techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or pop that contact link at the very top of the Jupiter Broadcasting website. And I'm going to throw a couple of the devices we talked about today in our show notes as well. And I want to give a special mention. We do have those affiliate extensions at the bottom of the Jupiter Broadcasting website. You click those before you shop, and then a portion of your shopping session is automatically contributed to the Jupiter Broadcasting Network and helps cover our operational costs. So just go over to our website and scroll down to the very bottom, and you'll find the links down there, as well as links for your favorite browser extension, or extensions for your favorite browser. Something like that. I kind of forget the details.
Right.
Alan, anything else we should cover before we run?
No, I think that's about it.
Okay. All right, sir. Well, I guess I'll just leave it at this. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in to this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.